Welcome everyone. Thank you all for taking some time to join us today for our webinar. Hopefully you'll leave with some useful information. My name is Deshawn and I'm a marketing and sales associate at Walkgrove, and today we'll be talking about why, when and how to choose generic e-learning, which will be presented by our senior instructional designer Lucy Hodge. Lucy has a particular interest in the use of emerging and social technologies to support online and distance training. She was first introduced to computers through learning games at primary school, and this experience engendered an ongoing passion for both technology and learning. Lucy began working as an instructional designer in 2011 and has worked with Walkgrove since 2014. And over the course of her career, Lucy has designed and developed both bespoke and generic learning solutions. In addition to her work with Walkgrove, she's undertaken a PhD in e-research and technology-enhanced learning. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We will ask everyone some polling questions throughout the webinar, so just keep your eye out for those. And if you have any questions during the presentation, just pop them into the questions box in your Zoom control panel, and we will make sure that we answer them at the end. Please make sure that your microphone is muted during the presentation, and the webinar should last no longer than about 45 minutes, and we'll be making the slides and recording available from our website in the coming days. So without further ado, I shall pass over to Lucy so we can get started.
Hi there, thanks ever so much, Deshawn. So as my colleague has said, my name's Lucy Hodge and I'll be talking to you about generic e-learning. So before we get started, here are the topics that I'm going to be covering today. So I'm going to be looking at the difference between generic and bespoke e-learning. I'll be looking at some myths and finding out what the real differences are. And then I'll be looking at, is generic e-learning the right type of e-learning for you? So really about understanding when generic e-learning can be a really great choice, because it is situational. Sometimes generic works best and sometimes bespoke works best. So understanding when generic really works for you. Then looking at identifying your requirements to make sure that you can choose the really best course for your situation, for your learners, for your organisation. Have a little bit look at the different types of customisation options because there is quite a different range of levels of customisation that are available for generic courses. Then we'll start looking at how to find potential suppliers, and once we've done that, just to see how you can compare them easily to make sure that you get a course that's right for you. So what's the difference between generic and bespoke e-learning? What you might think is that generic e-learning, off the shelf, it's pre-made and ready to go. That means it's cheap and poor quality. Whereas bespoke e-learning, because it's made to measure and it's designed specifically for you, is likely to be high quality but expensive. But are these stereotypes true? I think that's a really important thing to think about because often we do think bespoke, it's the best, generic, oh, okay, well, we're doing it just because it's a cheaper option. But I don't think that's really true. So we'll have a little look at what real differences are between generic and bespoke. So I tried to structure this to make it very easy to compare feature-wise. So for generic e-learning, one of the key features is that it's ready to go and it's available off the shelf. What that means is there's a very, very small lead time between being able to actually get that and roll it out. So it's not going to take you that long. It doesn't require any input from you. So if it's a generic e-learning course, there's no need for subject matter expertise, no need for your input. So that means that it doesn't require a lot of your time. Usually there's a licensing model and you don't own the intellectual property for generic e-learning because you haven't had that input. What that means is there'll be an ongoing cost, which is likely to be a small amount per learner. And the topics that are covered are usually the very popular topics, so very broad things that are applicable to lots of industries or lots of organisations within one industry. On the other hand, the features of bespoke e-learning is that it does need to be designed and built. This means there's a much longer lead time. I've said often an 8 to 12 week delivery timescale, but it can quite easily be longer, and particularly depending on the duration of the course. So you might have a 10-hour generic e-learning course that you can implement within a few days, or perhaps even give people access to on the day if you're just given licenses to log on to somebody else's LMS. Whereas if you're looking at making a 10-hour bespoke e-learning course, that's going to take weeks and months, possibly even up to a year. So that's a very, very big difference, which can mean you might lean to one rather than the other. Also, it requires collaboration with a commissioning organisation if it's a bespoke e-learning feature. It does require input from the commissioning organisation. And that's something that people don't always understand or always take account of. They want something bespoke, but they don't really want to get involved or give much input. And that then can be really challenging. It means that external subject matter expertise needs to be brought in, perhaps, and it can make things more drawn out. So you need to think about the input level. There's usually a one-off cost, which sometimes might be too much for somebody, and they might say, actually, we haven't got that many learners, so we prefer the licensing model. But you, as the customer, own the intellectual property because it's been created for you. It's your course, you can go and do what you want with it. But what that does mean is there can be a one-off cost, which is larger than the ongoing cost per user. And with Bespoke, the sky's the limit. You can cover any topic. It doesn't matter what it is. All that is affected is, how much money have you got, how much time have you got, and, how important is it to you that you own the IP. And so that's something to think about. So those are really the differences between generic and bespoke. And you can see there, I haven't said cost and I haven't said quality. And that's because you can have a low cost, low quality bespoke course. You could even have a high cost, low quality bespoke course, and vice versa. You can have something that's cheap but really, really good. So something might be cheap because actually it's really, really popular. There are lots of licenses, and it sells really, really well because it's a really high quality course. So you might find that with generic e-learning. So it's really not just about cost and quality. And so is it right for you? You've seen the kind of things you need to think about. So highly specialist courses, it's going to be more difficult for you to find those in an off-the-shelf situation. You're going to look at that and find, actually, maybe I don't have much choice. And therefore, you might decide, actually, in that case, a bespoke course will work better for us. And some courses I would recommend not being taken as a generic course, even if they're available, because they are too organisation specific, such as an induction. While you might say, yes, a generic induction will include this and this and this, actually tailoring it to an organisation and making sure that it works for you to really welcome learners, that's probably more important. However, there are several common generic topics. I think the ones that we can think of, probably health and safety, something I've written a lot of health and safety courses. Data protection, that's another big one, particularly when we had the GDPR come in. That was a lot of organisations were looking for courses on that. Computing and IT skills, so particularly on Microsoft programs or other programs as well as general computing skills. And then we've got the soft skills sections, where it's about sort of behaviour and models in that sense. Remember, though, that if you've got any models or processes that you're looking at in any of these areas, make sure they fit with your organisation. And that's something we'll look at later. So as I said before, bespoke doesn't always mean better. It might be that actually the generic course ticks all the boxes for you. And before you decide, ask yourself, is it a unique topic, in which case you might struggle to find a bespoke course, or is it in which case you might struggle to find a generic course, or if it's a very, very common topic, you might find some really, really good examples of generic courses out there. How many learners do you need to train? For a generic course, it's often done on a licensing basis. So if you've only got a few learners, you might well find that a generic course works out cheaper because you only have to buy maybe 5 or 10 licenses if you're a very small business. However, for much larger businesses, it might be that a bespoke course can work out cheaper. So that's another thing to think about. So how long should the training be, and what's your budget? If you've got a really high budget, again, you might think, yes, bespoke is better. But on the other hand, your budget might not cover the length of the training, duration of the training, particularly if it's something strongly regulatory. So for solicitors and things like that, for accounting firms, often there's an awful lot of online training that needs to be done, and continuous personal development as well. And so in those cases, it might be that even with a large budget, you might struggle to create something that's long enough and high enough quality. Whereas for a generic course, that's been pre-created and you can get that at a discount, essentially. Very importantly, do you have the subject matter expertise that you need? If you do, that's great. If you don't, generic is probably the way you want to go, because otherwise you'll either need to create the content yourself or pay for somebody else to help you create it. Now, of course, lots of organisations will offer to do that for you, but there's always a cost implication. So at Walkgrove, we absolutely can source content providers and work with them. However, that does add an extra cost. So if you don't have subject matter expertise internally, you might feel that actually going for a generic course works out better for you. And finally, have you got the time? Can you really commission a bespoke project? Do you have the not only the time to actually create it, so the fact it might take 3 months or even longer, but actually the lead up time with all your organization, getting the budget through, looking at different potential suppliers, all the work that goes into a procurement process that extends beyond comparing generic offerings. So that's really important. Often you'll have to get branding involved, you'll have to get all sorts of stakeholders. So that's something very much to think about, that time, and also the amount of time that you'll need to do as the project goes on, working with the project management team, getting people to review scripts, review storyboards, review different documents. And again, that's something that people sometimes underestimate. And so that might be another situation in which actually getting a generic course, if there's one that meets your needs, is a much better option for you. So again, the reason for choosing it isn't because it's low cost but low quality, and you shouldn't just choose bespoke because you think it's better quality. It's really about, does this meet my needs? Can I find what I need at a generic course? Often you might say, is it worth reinventing the wheel? There are hundreds, thousands of courses on health and safety. Surely there's one out there that might meet my needs. Do I really need one that's specialized for my organization? Sometimes the answer will be yes, you've got your own specific needs, but otherwise you might well find that there is something for you in the generic market. And so we move on to the key requirements. What are you looking for? What do you really need? And so I put down money, money, money. That is something that we always have to think about when we're looking at courses, whether we're buying something ourselves or whether we're commissioning it, purchasing something off the shelf. And what we're looking at, is it that you've got a very small budget, or are you more interested in looking for value for money? So it might be that something is a very, very cheap course. I think you can find things out there where licenses maybe cost 99 pence per learner, but at the same time, you might well get what you pay for. So you need to think about, well, I've spent 99 pence per learner. What have I got out of this? And it might be you decide really isn't really fit for purpose. Actually spending more money per learner might offer you better value for money because people get more out of it. How will the course be accessed? Do you have your own learning management system? In some cases, you might have one. In other cases, you might actually say, well, I'd like a supplier to offer that. I'd like them to have a platform that I can use. I don't have enough time to maintain a learning management system. It's too prohibitive costly. So actually, I want to access it on somebody else's system. So that's important to know, can you do that? How much management information do you need? What's the purpose of the training? Do you need this almost as a sort of compliance exercise? Do you need to say, okay, these people have definitely done it, I can run reports on this? Or is that not something you really need? And again, what about the different technical standards? This might be more important if you've got your own learning management system. You need to know that the suppliers can offer it to a standard that meets your needs. So whether it's SCORM 1.2, which is the most common, or if you're looking at SCORM 2004, much less common, and XAPI, also known as Experience API, or TINCAN. That's something that we're seeing more and more of, and more learning management systems are actually built in that, and it's used with a learning record store. And so understanding your technical standards and making sure that these needs are met by the organization is really important. And then what about branding? Can you get your branding on it? We'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. Accessibility considerations. Depending on the size of your organization, you may or may not have accessibility requirements, particularly in the public sector and in the third sector. Often there are strict requirements for accessibility. What that means is that people with visual impairments or auditory impairments can still access the course in a fair and equitable way. Some courses don't follow accessibility guidelines, others do. A lot of it depends on what tools are used to create them, how they're accessed. So that's something really important to think about. Then what are the target devices and technical infrastructure that the courses need to run on? So will people be accessing on their mobile phones? Will they be sitting at their desk working on a desktop? And what kind of browsers will people be using? Are they really quite old ones, or are they the most up-to-date ones? So for example, the older browsers, you'll often find that courses work best using Flash, which nowadays it's not even built into many new browsers, such as most up-to-date versions of Chrome. But the older browsers also aren't compatible with HTML5, so you have to be careful how is the interaction being built in. If it's Flash, it won't work on a mobile. If it's HTML5, it will work on mobile, but won't work on some older browsers. So again, making sure that you know which technical structures have been used for your course. And the duration, how long does it need to be? Are you looking for something that's quite succinct that learners can dip in and dip out of? Or actually you're looking for something that's a lot longer and more detailed? Some of it will be to do with subject matter, but some of it's down to personal preference. You might say, for my organisation, actually, people don't have a lot of time to sit down and take a course in one go. They need to dip in and dip out, and therefore it's more important to me that it's really concise and perhaps has several different shorter modules rather than one long course. So I prefer that. That's something else to think about before you go and look at the different course options. Assessment. What kind of assessment do you want? What kind of assessment do you need? Do you want something that comes before the course? Do you need some sort of diagnostic? Do you want a quiz at the end of the course? Questions throughout? How do you want that to work? You might even say, actually, I don't want an assessment at all. That's not the purpose of this course. And so that's important to understand when you're actually going and saying, okay, well, I need this to be really robust, and you find out a supplier doesn't really offer a robust assessment. That's something that might be important to you. On the other hand, the assessment might not be important at all, and so that's not a consideration for you. So think about that as well when you're comparing suppliers. Now we get on to the big thing. I mentioned branding, so really we'll start looking at customization and what customization can mean. Now, so far, I've set up generic versus bespoke. However, it's not really true. It's not really a dichotomy. It's more of a continuum. So you'll see I've got a very, very quick and simple graph here. And at one end, we've got pure generic right at the left-hand end there on the x-axis. So that's something that's got no customization whatsoever. And it goes in a gradient along to purely bespoke at the opposite end. And what you'll also notice on the y-axis, we've got additional one-off cost. That would be down at 0 at the pure generic end, and it can go really, really high the closer to bespoke you get. So it is a continuum, and really you might want to think about what levels of customization you need and also what a supplier can actually offer to you. So most courses down in the pure generic section might offer you branding for a logo, for example, or maybe logo and your organization's colors. Some will go a little bit further. You might be able to have some text changes and maybe even some changes to text and graphics. And then as you get further and further towards the bespoke, you'll get changes to text, graphics, and audio. You might even get some new pages, maybe a new quiz, things removed, things added, looking at things that are actually a lot closer to bespoke, with perhaps more generic process models, and additional generic documents, all the way up to something that's truly unique. And so as you see there, those are all things that different suppliers can offer. And it really depends on the needs of your organization. So for example, I created a variety of generic courses and was quite used to tailoring them for different clients. One, for example, was actually a charity. It was for a safeguarding course, and the charity actually dealt with children who were wheelchair users. And so the safeguarding course in the generic form was designed so that it covered training for both adults, so adults who were at risk, and also young people. But actually whole sections, they said this doesn't really apply to us because we don't have any vulnerable adults. Actually, we just want to focus on the children, and we need all of the graphics to change because the people that people will be dealing with are all young people using wheelchairs. So that's something that you need to think about there. Is that something that's of value to you? So how much customization do you want? At the simplest level, which will have the smallest one-off cost, you'll be looking at the addition of the logo, your brand colors, and your minor text changes. That's something that most organizations, most suppliers will be able to offer you. And a mid-level, you might look at text, images, maybe some re-recorded audio and some new pages. You'll need to think again about, do you have a learning management system in which you can host this? If the answer is no, you might struggle, or you might need to get a learning management system, because people who just, organizations who will just give you access codes to an existing learning management system often won't be able to offer that level of customization. And right through can get really, really complex. You might have an additional assessment or move to something that's bespoke but with generic models. On the other hand, you might say, maybe I should just go something fully bespoke at this point. So identifying potential suppliers. An internet search I ran on health and safety, it came up with close to 1 million hits, something along those lines, for health and safety e-learning. So you can see there's a lot of stuff out there. How the heck are you supposed to sift through? So I think the two things that you really need to consider are content quality and instructional design quality. These are both important, perhaps equally so. So you want to look for a supplier who can provide both of these. So looking at the people who can provide content, the best options are probably looking at your specialist organizations and regulatory bodies, because they will definitely have high quality content. They are subject matter experts. And so have a look, do they have any recommended suppliers? You might find that actually, yes, they do. They think one supplier does some really great things that cover off all the topics. And at the same time, they might offer accreditation. So we offer some courses which have been accredited. So for example, our health and safety courses have been accredited by ROSPA, and we've got other courses which have been accredited by the SRA, which is the Solicitors Regulation Authority. And so you know then that they've been signed off, the content has been verified, and yes, you're good to go. We know that's good quality content. Some content specialists might provide their own courses. The only proviso there is to think about what's the quality of the instructional design, which I'll move on to. And again, when you start to think about soft skills, that can be more difficult to judge. But so therefore, in those, you need to think about the different behavioral models and the different process models, what aligns with your organizational needs. When you look at instructional design, who should you go for? Well, one good option is to look at people who do both bespoke and generic courses. Those people probably understand the market in both sense. What about your industry awards? There aren't specifically awarding bodies, however, there are lots and lots of e-learning awards out there. And so look for people who've won industry awards, because we know what's good quality and we judge ourselves. So it can be really important, a really great sign to say, yeah, they've got an award, they've been shortlisted multiple years in a row, they've got multiple awards that they've won for different types of courses. You know that actually they've got great instructional design. And what's their client list like? Look at who else buys courses from the organization. It might well be that they've got other customers who are in the same area as you. You know, okay, they're trusted by my competitors. Actually, they might offer something that's useful for me. Maybe there's some really big household names that you recognize. So say Google or Microsoft. If they're accredited or partnered with anybody like that, you could say, actually, yeah, they probably know what they're doing. So again, looking on the client list, finding organizations that are like yours, organizations that are similar style to yours, probably have a similar budget to yours, and that can be really helpful. And finally, testimonials. Do you have happy clients who've said, yeah, they're great, I really love their courses? So definitely looking who has given good testimonials, who are they, what's their credibility? I'm sure that you'll find that most organizations will be more than happy to provide testimonials from very, very happy clients. If you say, okay, this is a great organization and they're really happy with the product that this supplier has offered, then they should definitely be somebody who goes on your shortlist. And again, remember both who's provided the content and who's provided the instructional design. You can't just have one without the other. You could be a great learning designer with really poor content. In that case, it's not going to work for you. On the other hand, you can have fantastic content but really poor instructional design. So that's something to really weigh up and say, okay, I really want to make sure I've got a mix of both. So where's the content come from and who's provided the instructional design? So thinking about that can really help. So now you're through to the final stage, which is comparing your suppliers. As we discussed earlier, there are different things that might be important to you. So I put down a few things that could be helpful for you to consider. So we've got cost, creativity, technical performance, experience, quality, and flexibility. They may be things that are important to you, they may not be. So you can, of course, populate this with your own headings. You might decide that one is more important to you than others. So you actually want to give that a greater weighting, perhaps cost or perhaps quality, maybe even flexibility, really depends on what's important to your organization. And then it's as simple as taking your 3 vendors and comparing the different elements, just giving them a numerical score, maybe out of 5 or out of 10, and then applying the weightings that you've given to your different categories and just adding them up and comparing them. In the end, if you've got 2 that are very close, you might just choose your gut feeling. Which one do I prefer? Who do I like more? And so that's where you'll finally make that decision if you've got 2 which are very, very close together. So it is very much individual. So there is no one right supplier. Just because somebody's right for you doesn't mean that they're right for somebody else, and vice versa. So it's very important to look at what you need and what's important to you and your organization. So in summary, there's a place for both bespoke and generic courses. It isn't one or the other. And generic doesn't always mean cheap and low quality. In fact, it can be very valuable. And so it's important to know that. Make sure you consider your topic and what you need to get out of the training before you start to look for that supplier. So it might be that actually it's not something you're going to find a lot of it in the generic market. On the other hand, it might be something that is really, really common, but then you need to look at what your needs are. Does it need to be short? Does it need to be long? As we discussed earlier in the course. So think about that. And what works for one might not work for another. That's the ultimate point. I can't come in here and say this is the best course, this is the best provider, because each organization is individual. You need to know what works best for you. And finally, conducting due diligence. Make sure you know where the contents come from and what the instructional design methodology is, because that makes sure that you can balance out the quality of the course. So we've come through to the end of our presentation now. So thank you all very, very much for your time. As you'll see on here, we've got a wide range of white papers and other resources. And this presentation will be going up on our website at some point, and an email will be going out to those who've signed up to get that information when it comes up onto our website. So I'd like to thank you all very, very much for your time. And I'd like to thank my colleague Deshawn for helping facilitate this.
No problem, Lucy. Thank you ever so much for that. We have had a question come in.
Okay.
And that is, where would you say is the best place to start looking for generic content?
Right, for looking for generic content, it can be quite difficult, as I said before, but really finding who are the subject matter experts and who are the specialists in the area. So really identifying those groups of people. So it might be an accredited body, it could be a specialist group, or you might even have somebody within your organization who knows something and who can provide you with guidance on that. So that's really the way that I'd start looking, and making sure that you understand it's somebody respected, that actually, particularly for regulatory needs, and it's very important to make sure that any courses that you choose have got the right content there, and so making sure that they've got real credibility, I think is the most important thing. So yeah, definitely your industry bodies, regulated organizations, professional societies, that kind of thing can be a really great place to look.
Thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
And that brings us to the end of the webinar then. As Lucy has said, the slides will be available on the website in the coming days. Just like to thank Lucy one final time. And
you're very welcome.
And with that, we shall end.